Okay, good morning. We're going to get started here. Thank you all for coming. My name is Steve Menace, and I'm president of Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. Been there for 12 years, and I have the honor of introducing our speaker today, Dr. Marcus Long. Dr. Marcus Long is going to talk about the Benedictine leadership in higher education, and we're excited about that. Dr. Long is the president of MountMarty College, and in July he'll celebrate his second year on the job as the president of MountMarty. So that's congratulations to that. Prior to joining MountMarty, Dr. Long served at the St. Louis College of Pharmacy, which is one of the largest and oldest colleges of pharmacy in the country. And he worked there as the vice president for administration. He did various things, including strategic planning. And I see his resume, just about everything. Human resources, institutional effectiveness, marketing and communications, college services, all the things that nobody wanted to do, they gave to Mark. And so he's a Missouri Tiger, so he got his undergraduate degree in political science there at Mizzou, and history, and a master's degree in education from the University of Missouri, and then he got a PhD from University of Missouri St. Louis in education. So we're excited about having him. I think one of the kind of interesting things he does there, he's long been a volunteer monthly and diocesan prison ministry in the state prisons there in Springfield, South Dakota. So we appreciate the work he's doing with the prisons there as well. So we're excited about welcoming Dr. Long to speak to us about Benedictine leadership in higher education. Dr. Long.
Thanks, Steve. President Menace, if you don't know, is the dean of the Benedictine presidents in our association. He's been on the job for 12 years. And if you know anything about higher education administration, 12 years is an eternity for college presidents. In fact, I think I'm about at the shelf life of college presidents now in a couple of years. So congratulations to you and all the good work you're doing in Atchison. You know, this is a daunting job, talking to you about Benedictine leadership in higher education. I've studied higher education leadership and administration for the better part of my career, 25 years or so. But I'm pretty new to the Benedictine world, only 2 years. As we'll talk about in a few minutes too, I'm not a cradle Catholic, although I am a practicing Catholic now, so that will enter into this too. So this is on one hand, exciting. I love talking about this. On the other hand, I'm a little terrified talking about Benedictine leadership to a lot of monastics in the group and many people here who've spent a better part of their careers in Benedictine environments. A little bit about MountMarty. I was at a conference last year, I guess, and this woman stopped me and she said, "You have a typo on your name tag." She said it should be Mount Mary College. I said, "No, actually it's not. It's MountMarty College." But thank you for pointing that out. Benedictine hospitality, right? Just so you know, Bishop Martin Marty was a Benedictine monk who was the first Catholic bishop of the Dakota Territories in the 1870s. So he came to Yankton, South Dakota, which was the capital of the Dakota Territories at that point, and he did a lot of work, and he realized that he needed a lot more help. He was Swiss, so he got word back to Switzerland that he needed some help there, and so a group of sisters came through Indiana and Missouri and eventually settled in Yankton, South Dakota, and they've been there for 135 years. And those are the Sisters of Sacred Heart Monastery who sponsor MountMarty College, and there's a transition between prioresses going on this weekend. So Sister Penny Bingham has been prioress for 6 years, and the new prioress, Sister Mary Beth Winsloff, was our director of campus ministry for many, many years. So we replaced that, and she moved across the street and kind of became one of my bosses. So that's interesting, but great person, and I just love being here. I just lament the fact that I can't be there for the installation this week. So the first thing I do, if you don't have a background in something, is read a lot. And so I really spent the last couple of months going over a lot of these resources. And if you have an opportunity, I think this would be helpful. Certainly the rule. I was just I just heard somebody say, I've read through it a few times. It would be worth your while to sit down and read that. And if you've read it before, maybe read it again, because obviously different things will jump out to you. It is inspiring and amazing. I also really I read Abbot Primate Emeritus Milker Wolf's book on leadership. I don't think he's in the room, is he? That was going to be another terrifying thing if I'm talking about the work that he did, and he's sitting in the room here. But a very good book on leadership that was only published a couple of years ago. Some older books, St. Benedict's Rule for Business Success, which was published, I think, in 2003, and then 2004, pretty well known, the Galbraith and Galbraith book on Benedictine, the Benedictine Rule of Leadership. And then another book I picked up actually in an airport that doesn't have anything to do with Benedictine leadership, but is pretty good on leadership, and I think the authors had a faith background, and so I've integrated some of those thoughts into my presentation today. I'll also have a heavy dose of reframing organizations with Bowman and Deal. How many people in here know anything about Bowman and Deal? Okay, good. So my graduate degrees are in higher education administration, and many higher education administration programs around the country really look at organizational analysis through the lens of Bowman and Deal. So I'll take just a few minutes to describe that. I won't do it any justice today, but I think it's helpful in terms of how I approach my job and what I do. And sometimes the folks who are from MountMarty in the room get really sick of me talking about Bowman and Deal and reframing conversations all the time. But they have wrote a book starting in the 1980s called Reframing Organizations, and it's been updated a lot since then. But the premise here is, it's a huge literature review of organizational management. And their idea is that when you're confronted with an opportunity or an issue, a challenge, you really should categorize that into one of four frames. You should recognize it for what it is. Often, and the four frames are structural, human resources, political, and symbolism. And their premise is so many of management decisions and leadership decisions are mischaracterized, and so you're dealing with a political situation with a structural solution, and things are going to fall apart on you. So, and sometimes you bounce back and forth. Sometimes it's a structural and political issue. But if structure, you think about machines, factories, how do you get things done as efficiently as possible? That's kind of maybe in some ways a Theory X kind of version. Efficiency, get things done, structural, factories. The next one is human resources. And that's a lot about we're all in this together. In some ways it's very Benedictine, right? This is a community. You think about your human resources directors at your colleges. They want to typically find out solutions. They want to work together, figure out the next best step. Human resources frame, very important. We're all a community, we're in this together, how do we get our work done? Political, it's all based on power. There's usually a power dynamic at play there. And then symbolic is symbolism, and that's heavy in higher education, right? I dress up in medieval gowns twice a year and hand out the modern day version of sheepskins, right? And so symbolism is incredibly important. It's also, as I'll talk about, incredibly important in Benedictine charism. So those are the ideas, and we'll kind of operate through those a little bit later on. But you need to recognize with Bowman and Deal that you are more comfortable in some of those areas than others. Steve mentioned that I have a bachelor's degree in political science. So politics, I kind of like that. I think power can be used for good. But I like figuring out where power is. I'm also very heavy in human resources. Structural is a challenge for me. a little bit more of a challenge, as the staff here will know, who are more comfortable in structural areas, because I'm like, oh, do we really have to follow that rule? Can't we just do something else? Let's be nice. Let's get this done together. And Tabitha, our CFO, was like, no, let's stick to the rule. And then also the other one I'm not very good in is symbolism, and I need to do a better job at that, and I know that's a growing edge for me. And then also the other book that I used a lot, if you haven't read this book, Sister Joan Chittister's Wisdom Distilled from the Daily. That book will make you feel really great as you're reading it, also make you think deeply as you're reading it. Many of her books do that, and so I would suggest that you read that as well. So my experiences, this is not another college president just sitting up here saying, oh, this is all the stuff I've done, because if you read this, a lot of it is probably something my mother would prefer I not talk about. But it's important, I think. I grew up on a Missouri farm, and I didn't really like farm work at all. I'm glad I had that background. I know how it works. I know and I appreciate learning from an early age the value of hard work, but I didn't really like it. And so I knew to get off of that farm, I needed to go and get a college degree. I also became Catholic in 2002 when I was in my 30s. So I was raised in the Disciples of Christ Church, and my wife was raised in the Baptist Church. So you're like, how did you become Catholic? Well, my mother was a teacher, a school teacher, and she left teaching when she believed that she couldn't teach kids how to think anymore in the 1990s. And there's a lot of state mandates coming down, a lot of standardized tests were coming down. She said, I'm out of here. So she went to work for a nonprofit organization, and she worked with a group of sisters there. So she started attending Mass with the sisters. My wife and I had twin sons, and we were looking for a church home. So she became Catholic, and we started going to Mass with her, and then we went through our CIA. At the time, I was a manager at the University of Missouri, but I look back and I often wonder, is kind of that God's plan to start me on that path to where I wound up today? I don't know, kind of daunting to think about. I was an average student in high school and college, like a lot of young boys and men. I'm like, I love learning. I don't really like the structure of sitting in class and turning in homework and studying for exams. So I know I'm in a room of overachievers. I know you all did extraordinarily well. I wasn't that kid, but I love learning. I love learning. As my dad would say when he wishes I was out mowing the yard or disking or something like that, I was in wondering about the latest election in Great Britain or the political parties in France. That was kind of what I did during my teenage years. So I love learning, just not formally. I was a pretty active student at the University of Missouri, though, and after I did a few other things, including law enforcement and real estate, I came back and was hired as an executive staff assistant in the chancellor's office at the University of Missouri in 1994 when I was 25. That is an important point in my life. So I've worked either in the chancellor's offices or president's offices or directly for them my entire career, because I started out as an executive staff assistant. So I can tell you all the people who walked by my desk and never said anything to me because I was a lowly administrative support staff member. And I didn't like how that made me feel. And so it didn't really drive me, it just made me feel bad for them as well as myself. But I always thought, no matter where I go in this world, I'm going to treat everybody as an equal. And that's what I try and do every day. I also had a great boss there. Chris Cocola is her name, and she saw that at least she thought I had some potential. And so she kind of promoted me through, and I ended up becoming kind of in charge of much of the marketing and communications functions at the University of Missouri before I left. Then I moved to St. Louis as a vice president, chief of staff, adjunct professor, taught state government, and now president. Got my master's in 2007 and PhD in 2015 in higher education administration. And kind of an interesting factoid, I've always lived within 30 miles of the Missouri River. And if you know your geography, there are 3 great Benedictine colleges that sit right on the Missouri River. The University of Mary, in Bismarck, MountMarty in Yankton, and Benedictine in Atchison. So, great river. And great schools. You've seen these before. I think those of you who have joined the Leadership Institute, maybe the pedagogy program too, you got some reading earlier. If you haven't looked at these 10 hallmarks of Benedictine education, I would encourage you to do so. It's on the ABCU website, abcu.info. There's a lot of descriptions here. You know, I think there's a lot of people in higher education, when they see words like obedience and discipline, there needs to be a broader context and understanding there. So I would encourage you to read those very much. And I see that Larry Goodwin is on the agenda, so I hope that I'm not stealing much of his thunder. If so, Larry's not in the audience either, I don't think. I'm looking out here so far. Don't tell him that I talked about it if he ends up talking about this tonight at St. Ben's. But he had an unbelievable speech last year in Duluth, right before he left the presidency, the College of St. Scholastica. And he made 3 points to answer the question, what difference does a Benedictine education make? And I like this speech so much, we actually had a retreat, a manager's retreat at MountMarty, focused on this. And I talked a lot about it. I shared it with our Board of Trustees too. It's 3 points. What difference does this education make? Number one, we're communal. You understand that. Community, right? It's cooperative, not competitive. He says in that speech, in the Ivy League institution, the dean of the law school in an Ivy League institution in the 50s, look to your right, look to your left, and only one of you will be here this time next year. You've heard that old adage. He said, with Benedictine colleges, it's look to your right, look to your left, and these are the people who will carry you across the finish line. And I think that's really important, and that's an important way I approach my job. As leaders, he says, we need to model and to encourage behaviors that strengthen community and discourage actions that are corrosive of community. He also said our education is transformational, falling in love with learning and with the great truths. And I tell freshmen as they come in, I want MountMarty to be transformational for you, spiritually, academically, socially, extracurricular activities. I want you to be very different when you leave this institution than when you came. Now, research shows, Pasquarella and Terenzini shows, that you will be a very different person when you leave college than when you started. But what is different about that Benedictine education? And a speaker earlier talked about, and some of you may have heard of, the crock-pot model, whereas the Jesuits may be a pressure cooker, that Benedictine education is a crock-pot. Just let it soothe in. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Yes, we must teach our students to think critically and independently, Larry says, but the wisdom tradition knows that rigor without direction and power without purpose are empty and maybe dangerous. As Larry says, there are a lot of smart terrorists in this world. So the value of that education. And the next stage, he says, inclusive excellence. Benedictine hospitality requires nothing less. Again, when I'm talking to new students, I say, we expect you, when you enter this community, to change us for the better. How are you going to do that? That's daunting when you're talking to an 18-year-old or when you're talking to a 30-year-old new faculty member. But how are you going to change this community for the better when you become a part of it? Very important ideals. So, with all Benedictine humility, when Janine and Marianne and Patty put me on the agenda to talk about this, I figure I better come up with something. I don't profess to know a lot about Benedictine leadership traits, but in the reading that I did, these are the ones that really jumped out to me, and I've kind of used this as a framework on how I approach my job. So really this entire presentation is largely how I view what I do. And so I'm hoping we can have a robust discussion at the end of this in which we can all grow, because I don't want to say this is how everybody should do it. I just offer that this is maybe one opportunity, given the experiences that I have, that I approach what I do. And I'll talk about each one of these individually next with some people who have very much affected me and how I think, to give you some examples of how I model what I do. Humility, starting there. Some of the quotes in the literature I read from Galbraith and Galbraith: humility in its purest form is actually the greatest source of personal power. And Abbot Primate Emeritus Snooker Wolf: if we want to exercise true authority and not arbitrary power, we must stop worrying about our own importance. Humility. How do we bring humility to everything we do at our institution? Right? This guy is one of my mentors, Richard Wallace. He's in his 80s now. He was chancellor at the University of Missouri for 8 years there. And he just was wonderful. He was just so humble. He came into that office exactly the same way he left it. And he was very much the same person. And I don't know about you, but there have been a lot of senior administrators that I've been around in my career who are very much changed by that office. Again, they dress you in medieval gowns oftentimes. Nobody calls me Mark. I wish everybody would call me Mark. Everybody calls me Dr. Long, President Long, you name it. I have a role to play, and it may be different than a role that other people play in the organization, but it's no more important. It's just different. And so Richard had that view when running a major research university. It was amazing. I worked in his office, and my wife and I had our twin sons. He sent a huge flower arrangement to her room. There were probably, there's 20 people who work in his office, right? He also came to the baby shower that we had with a lot of other people. And so he may have been the only other guy there besides me at the baby shower. But I'm like, turn to my wife, it's cool. We have the chancellor sitting here, participating in this. But unbelievable guy. We had a very effective administrator too. We had a situation with a fraternity on campus, and there was a Saturday meeting that I remember particularly well. And he loved his grandkids so much. He spent a lot of time with them. And he had spent a lot of time, they lived not in Columbia, they lived elsewhere. And he had them at his house that day, and he and his wife were watching them. And he had to leave for this meeting. And we had attorneys, we had the National Fraternity Organization, we had their attorneys, the university's attorneys, we had the student affairs people. It was an intense meeting. Richard walks in a Daffy Duck t-shirt. That's just who he was, right? He was going from playing with the grandkids to coming in for a meeting, and it was an effective meeting. They made a lot of decisions and moved on. But I know a couple of administrators are like, oh, I can't believe he did that. But he was who he was and is. Lifelong learning. It's one of our core values at MountMarty too. In a couple of these books, information is the lifeblood of strategy. And Benedictines were a learning community. He was talking about this past tense in the medieval times, but it could be the same today. Their leaders were teachers, their libraries were databases, and the rural fostered study. It's important to remember, especially figuring out how to take that information in and make decisions with it. I get tons of information daily. I'm sure everybody in here does. I get 3 emails before 6 a.m. telling me what's going on in higher education in America that day. And I try and read through them and skim them, but by the time I get to the office, I have people need things, I need to sign things, I'm off to my first meeting, so managing it is very important. But it's important to understand that the world is changing. And how do we balance the Benedictine stability with a very dynamic, changing environment in higher education? That's tricky for everybody in this room. Don't have the answers for it. Vicki Rosser was one of my mentors in my master's program at the University of Missouri. She's at UNLV now. Lifelong learner. She came out of high school one direction in retail, did that very successfully for a while, then decided, no, I want to go back to college. So in her 30s, she started at a community college, and she eventually got her PhD in higher ed administration and has become a luminary in that world. She's a full professor at UNLV now and was on the editorial board of 3 of the top higher education administrative journals, and never stopped learning, and to this day never stops learning. She's amazing, and I still keep in contact with her. And believe it or not, I sometimes use her for literature review, right? I'm having this issue at this college. What do you think about this? And she gives me the faculty perspective, but she also gives me the higher education scholar perspective. And it's important for all of us to have those people outside the institution, take a lot of ideas and information from people inside the institution, but it's also important in your job and what you do to talk a lot to people outside your institution who have similar jobs and similar perspectives, but also different. Listening, so important. I try and do this a lot. The staff in the room would probably say, "Yeah, sometimes you do okay, other times maybe not." It's a growing edge, I think, for all of us here. Listen carefully, my son, to the master's instructions and attend to them with the ear of your heart. From the very beginning of the prologue of the rule. When I got this job, I talked to somebody else who had been a president of a Benedictine college, and he said, "Mark, the first thing I will tell you when you're around Benedictines is you need to stop thinking and start listening." And I have really tried to do that. I'm not very good at thinking anyhow, but really listening is important to what I try and do. Skillful listening has a stimulating effect, encouraging the other person to speak and even more to think. It frees the tongue and the brain, Knucker Wolf says. Somebody I think that does this very well is Bill Danforth, who was chancellor for almost 25 years of Washington University in St. Louis. I had the good fortune, because of the University of Missouri is a land-grant institution, huge ag school. After he left WashU, he and his family founded the Danforth Plant Sciences Center in St. Louis. So it is the agricultural equivalent to a biomedical research center. If you recognize the name Danforth, Jack Danforth was his brother, a longtime United States Senator from Missouri, and they are the heirs of the Wollston Purina company. And when he was chancellor of Washington University, that foundation put in about $400 million into Washington University. Back in the 70s and 80s, that was real money, $400 million. But he did a great job. He was a very effective administrator. And when he retired, he and his family worked on bettering he'd worked his entire career on human health. He's a cardiologist. So he wanted to work on nutritional health, and that's what the Danforth Plant Sciences Center does. And so I was fortunate enough to be on their Marketing and Communications Council for about 10 years. And so you'd have all these marketing people sitting around the table. Again, they're not real great listeners. Marketing people aren't. They like talking a lot and conveying ideas, and so we would do that. And Bill would sit at the table just very quietly for sometimes 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. And then he would say something like, "It seems to me that X." Or, "Have you ever thought about this?" And he never ever, even though he was the executive chairman of this organization, he never pushed his ideas, but he kind of laid them in the middle of the table for us to ponder. But he always knew, even though he had this great, wonderful career, he always knew he wasn't the expert in marketing and communications. So he wanted to hear what everybody else thought first. And then he would say it. He's still doing it. He's in his 80s now, and he's still in that same position as chairman of the Danforth Plant Sciences Center. Just an amazing person and what he's done with his life. But he listens very, very well. Serving. No art of leadership, whether in the business world, in child rearing, or at school, is of any use if it's not based on the respect for the uniqueness, individuality, and human dignity of those who are entrusted to us, and for their freedom and the right to their own life. This is Father Thomas Werdekemper, who shortly after I arrived at MountMarty, he left as chaplain. I hope the two aren't related. But he's a monk at Assumption Abbey in North Dakota, and he was called back to be the parish priest there at the abbey. He's our graduate, and he was chaplain for both the monastery and MountMarty for 6 years. And he did his work very well. He was involved with the sisters. He was involved with the students. He really was, took care of them, very pastoral, really inspired them, counseled them enormously well on campus, faculty, staff, and students. But you would also see him in jeans and a t-shirt planting flowers and painting rooms all over campus. He did that when he was a student. He worked for the facilities office at MountMarty, and we came back as chaplain. He thought that was very important. The rule says physical work is important, and so he took that literally. Think of how powerful that was to these students who were walking by, seeing Father Thomas digging in the flower bed, stopping and having a conversation with them, or painting the main entry area of Bede Hall, which is our main administration building, which he did before he left. Just an unbelievable person, very humble, very, just loves everybody around him. And in fact, he was asked by a reporter one time, he said, "What do you think about working with all these students from a variety of backgrounds?" And he said, "I just try and love them a little." Just amazing person, but serving is at the heart of what he does. He also would be very upset if he knew I was talking about him today. So I'll have to get his permission before this gets put on the web. Community. I want to spend a lot of time today talking about community, or some time, because I think it's so important to what we do. Everything I do day in and day out, and I think many of the other administrators and faculty in the room think the same way, is how do I strengthen the MountMarty community? The common interest must be carefully articulated, perceived by all members as being important and something worth bonding over, Galbraith and Galbraith says. And then Skrabek says part of Benedict's genius was his integration of community hierarchy and organization. This video I'm going to play, I hope it works, is from Caltech. I don't know how I ran across this video, but it's the 2013 presidential search video at Caltech. Caltech did approve me showing this, by the way. I did get approval from them yesterday. So I said, "Sorry, I have a presentation this week. Is that okay?" They're like, "Let me check." But they said yes. So I'm glad I did this. But I think this is not a Catholic institution. It's not a religiously affiliated institution. It's a fantastic research institution that, of course, happens to have a major research enterprise from NASA sitting on its campus, the Jet Propulsion Lab. But the culture they talk about in this video is amazing. And I've used it actually several times in the last 4 years or so to inspire me at whatever institution I'm at. And so I'm going to play it in its entirety. It's 7 minutes long. I hope it doesn't bore you too much, but I think how they talked about the culture and sense of community at Caltech is kind of amazing here. And I realize every institution has its problems. And no, Sheldon is not on this for you Big Bang Theory folks. But I think that underscoring the importance of community and culture on this campus, which is largely the same, it has the same enrollment as many of our campuses, by the way. It's not a huge research university. I think is important. So I'll go ahead and play that.
We reached out to the entire Caltech community, students, staff, faculty, and alumni, and asked them what do they want from the next president of Caltech. And woven throughout their answers was this expression of deep and abiding love for this place.
There's this place where you're free to dream, to try new things and to fail, to answer the really hard questions about the nature of the universe, to figure out how we're going to develop new clean energy, to diagnose important diseases. And it's a place where you have the resources to try the unconventional idea, to go against the grain and to really pursue science the way that you've always imagined you could.
It's where true scientific breakthroughs are made. It's just such a unique environment that everyone can be a part of. And it's truly an incredible place to be. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
It's this idyllic setting that's been arranged so that we can all focus on our research. We're in this beautiful place. We can talk to each other and bounce ideas off of each other. We can all go over to the Athenaeum and have a meal together. It's filled with just incredibly wonderful people who leave their egos at the door and focus here on their research and trying to make a difference.
The first time I came to Caltech, I was really amazed by the atmosphere here. It has this park-like feel to it, but there's an intensity about the science that's really contagious.
When I first came to Caltech, I was a postdoc. I asked one of my fellow postdocs about Caltech, and they said, being a faculty member at Caltech is one of the greatest things that could possibly happen to you, and they were right.
Coming to Caltech every day is truly an adventure. I have no idea what's going to land on my desk.
Whether it's a new project we're pursuing in the lab, or some new project we're taking on with students, or even a new collaboration that involves faculty from across campus. The Caltech community is just a lively one, and one that you're always excited to wake up and to see what's new the next day.
I want to get up. I want to interact with my peers. I want to go to class.
At Caltech, we have a different kind of party, homework party. Basically, collaboration allows us to work together.
The house system is great because you can go down the hall and just talk to people. You talk to your friends, and everyone's working on the same problem sets together because we're all in these core classes together.
The house system in general is awesome in that it nurtures a close-knit environment where people can bounce ideas off each other.
And the reason why we call them houses is because it is like one big family.
First time I stepped onto campus at Caltech and began working here, the environment was very welcoming.
The labs are amazing. We got to set up the labs. That's, a luxury most researchers never have. It was really exciting because we all realized we were working towards the same goal. I love the people here. Everyone's amazing. Everyone's really supportive of my research, and I love that.
The students on campus like to pull lots of pranks. They've filled my office with helium balloons at one point just to get back at me for a prank I pulled on them in class.
Ditch-Day's a fantastic event. Zany, it really speaks to the spirit of Caltech.
Even though we take science very seriously, we don't take ourselves too seriously. The students all know how to have a lot of fun, and the faculty like to join in whenever we can.
We have a lot of fun here, but we work hard, we study hard, we think deeply about things like the honor code.
The honor code's, I think, one of the most unique things about Caltech.
The honor code at Caltech states that no member of the Caltech community shall take unfair advantage of any other member of the Caltech community.
For our undergraduates, it means that they're able to take their exams without a professor looking over their shoulder, knowing that they're trusted to follow the integrity of the course. For the faculty, it means that we treat each other with respect and consideration. And for the staff, it also means that they work together as teams, knowing that together we're a stronger community.
That culture of emphasizing trust is enormously empowering.
We really enjoy the freedom and trust that the administration places in us, and we do our best to work honorably and with integrity.
I'm incredibly proud that Caltech values its honor code as this core tenet of its culture.
Caltech, the stereotype is that we only focus on our scientific research. We also have a large number of other interests. We have a lot of different opportunities available to students. We have the sports, we have music, I play in the orchestra, I've been involved in student government, I volunteer.
Our department's very invested in outreach. That's one thing I've really enjoyed in doing outreach activities, is that you get to interact with a lot of people coming from different backgrounds and be able to find in each different group of people something to connect with.
What makes Caltech special are the people.
I've grown up here at Caltech in many ways, and have even grown my own family, both literally and academically. I've proposed to my wife here on campus, and my lab has grown now to the point where I have students who now have their own students on other campuses.
I've worked at JPL and at Caltech. JPL is a really incredible place, and there's a constant flow of traffic and ideas between them.
One of the great experiences of being here at Caltech was I was here at the time that Curiosity landed on Mars. It was an amazing experience like no other.
That enthusiasm, that excitement is infectious and it's inspiring.
And for me to be able to come here every day and support this kind of work is extremely satisfying, and I'm humbled actually to be able to work here.
This is a special time for Caltech, indeed for all of higher education, with issues like online education, the future of research funding. I think we're all looking forward to a leader who's going to have an open mind and a bold approach to attacking these various problems. And they'll do it in a way that really understands and cherishes Caltech's special place in higher education.
The kind of leader that Caltech needs now is somebody who can come and share a great vision with the faculty.
It's very important to staff that we attract the right president, and the reason is that staff really see the president as the standard bearer for the institution, as the protector, the defender, and the example of the culture that we want to sustain here at Caltech, but also one who is willing to lead us into an even better future and to recognize those opportunities and not be afraid to seize them.
We're really at an incredible school here, and we're surrounded by brilliant engineers and scientists and mathematicians.
When you walk the campus, you feel the innovation, the activity, the brilliance of the people here.
The extraordinary people who want to make a difference, who are willing to reach out and do something completely new, completely different.
We have a love of learning. We're curious. We're creative and imaginative. We're courageous because we're not afraid to take risks.
And we're passionate. The faculty are passionate, the students are passionate, and the staff is passionate. We really care about what we do, and we're devoted.
Everybody just wants to come back and be part of Caltech.
And that's the most important message. They love Caltech, and they want the next president to love it too.
So when they hired a new president and he was inaugurated, he said that video was one of the reasons he applied for that job. He came from the University of Chicago, where I think he was provost there. But he said, that video hooked me. And I think hopefully you can see, we're very different institutions from Caltech, but I hope you can see kind of that culture that they strive for, and that in many ways they have, shows through in this video. And it's I think it's very well done. Discipline. So this is, I'd like to spend a few minutes on this one too. This is an organizational theme. I think as organizations we have to be disciplined, and our leaders have to be disciplined. I talked about in a few minutes ago, the fact that higher education is changing, and yet we're focused on Benedictine stability, but we also have to be fully aware of our environment and how it is changing. And I think planning is incredibly important. I think this is the intersection between planning and adhering to our values, core values, and our past. The quotes here, any strength that is overused or carried to an extreme can really hurt you in the long run. And discipline connotes the concept of instruction, education, and training, and exercise designed to provide a lesson in proper conduct. Discipline can be punitive, and I think in the rule we see that on occasion. But it's also being disciplined yourself in what you're doing and how we carry that into our jobs. What's the goal here? What is the community's goal? How are we driving toward it? And then being disciplined into attaining it. Or if you realize when you're partially down that road, you have to have the forethought to understand that you may have to change direction if it's the wrong direction. Hopefully, if it's a major decision like a strategic plan, you will have enough inputs throughout that process before you get too far down the road to realize it's wrong. But in smaller decisions, sometimes you may be further down that path and realize that you need to change. So Franklin and Marshall Liberal Arts College in Pennsylvania has a new president, had a new president in 2011, a new strategic plan, and they wanted to grow the number of Pell Grant recipients that they have on campus. And so they were focused. They eliminated merit aid, very controversial there. If you know anything about the demographics of the Northeast, anytime you start tampering with something, there may be a cost-benefit analysis that needs to take place, because there aren't a lot of students, those of you who are in the Northeast, there aren't a lot of students coming out of high school in the Northeast now. And so it was risky for them, but they maintained the path, they were disciplined, they eliminated merit aid, and they started having pretty expensive 3 weeks intensive seminars for rural and underrepresented students on their campuses. And they've increased Pell Grant recipients significantly in the last 6 years. Symbolism. Again, I said this is one of my challenges. I don't always pay as much attention as I should, but I think it's important for all of us to pay attention to the symbols that we send off in our daily activities, and we as an organization, as MountMarty College or any of your colleges and universities, convey. It's meaningful. It can be positive, it can be negative. Again, I try to be intentional with this. After 15 centuries of experience, the Benedictines have developed a clear sense of important organizational rites and rituals, Galbraith and Galbraith says. Community customs are what make the family family. They're things done together that tell us who we are together. I think the ritual of prayer is important on Benedictine colleges for students who have a strong faith background or maybe not so strong a faith background to see who we are and what we do. We have MountMarty College prayer that all of us who work at MountMarty College can recite from memory that Father Thomas wrote when he became our chaplain. And it's done before every sporting event that we have. It's done before many classes, and all the time when we come together as a community, we recite that prayer. The meal prayer is on the wall in our main dining room. We don't let anyone take food outside of the main dining room because we want everyone to be there and enjoy the meal together as a community. Very, very important. When Jane Wood started as our Vice President for Academic Affairs, she'd been there a couple of months. Sorry, Jane, I'm going to tell this story on you. And she said, I'm hearing that there was a budget cut some years ago, and the faculty can't have refreshments at their faculty meetings. What's up with that? I said, I don't know what's up with that. Well, I checked into it. In fact, several years ago, it was a budget decision. And I think Jane and I had a conversation that for $500 a year, we can probably provide the snacks for the faculty. And we did for the staff senate as well when they got together. It's important. That symbol was very important. You took something away from us that really meant something. And I don't know that they were, and some of our faculty are here, I don't know that they were consulted about that decision. And so I think understanding what sort of symbols we're constantly sending out is incredibly important, especially in times of budget retrenchment, I think, in our colleges and universities. I also think presence is an important part of this, too. Being present with our students and with each other is very, very important. There are a lot of times after a hard day's work, I know the basketball team is playing at 8 o'clock. I live 8 miles west of the campus, and I go and have dinner with my wife, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to go back there. But I also hear from the athletic staff how important it is for those athletes to look up in the stand and see the sisters and see me, see their faculty, and see staff members and fellow students there. And so I think we have to remember that. We were invited on Twitter, actually. A young man who was graduating last month was defending his senior project, presenting his senior project in English. And so he just sends a note out there on Twitter and says, if anybody wants to see this, stop by this room at this time, and he'll be there and do that. And I responded to him on Twitter, and I said, does that include presidents? And he said, yeah, I'd love to see you there. And so Dr. Wood, who's a professor of English, and in addition to being our vice president for academic affairs, And I went down, and it meant the world to him. I saw him the next week, right before commencement. I mean, right before the commencement ceremony, he was waiting outside of one of the rooms, and he said, "I really appreciated the fact that you came to my presentation. That really meant a lot." And so I think we kind of get involved in doing our daily work, and we don't realize that we need to be present with each other. Very important. Stability. Drifting outside of higher education here a little bit. It takes real courage to maintain stability in an economic downturn, but that's the investment required in the Benedictine model, says Graybeck. And 3 keys to stability are community, fairness, and tenure. Tenure, I hear some of the faculty laughing. I think they meant longevity, not necessarily academic tenure. Just clarifying that. The oldest corporation in North America is Hudson's Bay Company. Do you remember that from history class? And the fact that they were really responsible for much of Canada for a long time. It's been in existence since 1670. It's still in existence. It still does trading. Now it has stores now. It's not trading furs anymore, I don't think. But it's been around for almost 350 years. It owns Saks Fifth Avenue in the United States, for instance. But it's been very stable during that time. It's changed as it's needed to change. But remember, in 1670, the British were settling what is now Canada, right? Hudson's Bay Company, for the first 300 years of its existence, even though all its work was in Canada, was a British company. It didn't become a Canadian company until 1970. So a very stable company, but one that was very, very successful and still is. So, I'm so proud of this because I did this myself. Maybe the best thing I've ever done on PowerPoint. St. Benedict meets Bowman and Deal. So if you talk about those 4 frames, and how we should always analyze every situation we're confronted with, and if you have a decision, whether it's a good one or a bad one, an opportunity or a challenge, they say those managers and leaders who can roll through these frames quickly and determine where this issue is coming from and how to deal with it are going to be successful more often than not. And I'd like to think in my career, since I've been using this, it has worked out that way. But when I was putting this together and trying to merge these Benedictine themes and traits with this Bowman and Deal framework, I had the thought that perhaps these Benedictine traits can be responses to challenges or opportunities in each one of these frames, right? So structural, you could respond to that by providing some sort of stability in making sure efficiency is taken care of. But you'll also, if there's a structural issue and a question, you should need to learn a lot about it, both from research, literature, other thought leaders, as well as the problem or opportunity itself. Human resources, humility, listening, serving. We are in this together. Being empathetic. How can I help you deal with this issue? So I don't know, some thoughts about that. And we can have, hopefully that will stimulate some discussion. I'll return to the slide in a few minutes. And that's the end of it. I hope good time for sharing. We have just a few minutes. I think we have Mass starting at 11:30. So we need to leave probably in 15 or 20 minutes or before. I will say that I did have 2 Benedictines take a look at the slide deck. Sister Penny Bingham, the prioress of Sacred Heart Monastery, on her second to last day of being prioress. It took time out. She also has a chapter meeting she's planning here. Took time out, reviewed it, and said it's great. Father Valerian Oderman is our current campus chaplain, and a monk from Richardson as well, also has a doctorate in education and has spent much of his life in education and provided some feedback on this as well. So I'll open it up and see if you have any questions. Yeah.
Go back to the previous slide.
Yep. Whoops. Yeah. I put community in the middle because I think it is, when I come to work every day, I think about how am I going to strengthen this community? How are we going to make it better than it was yesterday? And I really think it floats into all four of these frames. I really do. Yeah.
Excuse me for being so bold as to suggest a change to.
Sure. I would love that.
Could the arrows go both directions? Because I think that would be.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, no, I think that's a great suggestion. I'll make that change. Yes, sir.
You referred to a prayer that you have that is recited before games and all that?
Yes, MountMarty College.
Could you rattle it off for us?
Oh, you'll have to help me.
Or at least paraphrase it, whatever.
Yeah. O God, creator of all things, sources, wisdom, and knowledge, send your Holy Spirit to guide our thoughts, words, and actions, so that everything we do will begin with your inspiration and continue with your guidance and blessing. Help us to speak and act with integrity so that we may uphold the values of MountMarty College, and we use our talents and abilities in the best ways possible so that you may be glorified and our neighbors served. We pray these things through Jesus, your Son, in the power of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Yeah. Ooh, on the spot. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Props to my colleagues. Yeah, thank you. Yes?
Thank you very much.
Sure.
I appreciate it. I'm just intrigued as to why discipline is the only benefit in political as opposed to also humility and listening and serving, which you don't do in research.
Yeah, so the political one is a tough one for me with kind of the Benedictine themes that I came up with, because political is based on power dynamics. And the way I read the rule, St. Benedict liked structure, right? He liked structure in the monasteries. Ultimately, the abbot or the prioress is the authority, but it's important for the abbot and the prioress to also be a servant leader and consult the chapter, the community, a lot too. I put it there because structurally I'm not sure it does fit any place else. If you have a power dynamic, I see these other things as being focused on human resources. That we're building this community, we're all in this together. I did think about putting discipline. It could very easily go up in structural too, because I think there's an efficiency component to it. But I think there are probably elements that can go on all four of those. But I thought that was the best place for discipline, given that there is a power dynamic to discipline, both internally and in a group. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned stability in your presentation, which I think is great. And I wanted to ask, how do you anticipate being able to keep stability when you see more tax cuts going to the wealthy and people being not as well off to pay for college?
Yeah, huge issue. So, and that I spent a lot of time thinking about that. I won't say that I have all the answers to it, but I spent a lot of time thinking about it because at MountMarty, 38% of our traditional undergraduate students are Pell eligible, and we have an adult education center in Watertown, South Dakota, where 52% are Pell eligible. So I do spend a lot of time making sure that we are as accessible as possible. And in fact, the cost of attendance, true cost of attendance, we are less expensive than public institutions in South Dakota, some public institutions in South Dakota. We focus a lot on that, and we've upped our aid significantly to address that. But that's a huge challenge in higher education, and one that I know our executive team and our board. So we have a visioning process that actually is starting to take place this summer with our board, and a new strategic planning process that is kicking off that hopefully will be completed a year from now. So those issues are going to be well thought out and hopefully addressed in a state that has 11 four-year public and private institutions and 850,000 people. So, challenge. We better define who we are very well and communicate it effectively. And I look at our Dean of Enrollment, Stephanie Mosier, sitting there nodding vigorously. She knows we have to do that. Other questions? Yeah.
You know, all of us in leadership positions, I think often feel the stress of creating community, creating culture. And we often feel it falls on our shoulders. But when I teach graduate leadership courses and so on. When you read the research, most culture and community is created it starts with the leader.
Yep.
From the people within.
That's exactly right.
And I think that's where it's the strongest, when it organically is developed, which then always leads me in my position. It's about hiring the right people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get the right people, great things can happen.
Yes.
And often leaders can step aside. And I think that's what we have to remember, that burden is not just ours alone, but from those in the community.
Yeah. Excellent point. And I think it goes right back to humility, too. Those of us who are in leadership positions need to be humble and never realize that when we're walking into a room, we have all the answers. I never, ever want to be in a position that I consciously think, I know how this meeting is going to turn out. Because I want Jane and Tabitha and Stephanie and Paul and Helen and all of my other colleagues, I want them to change my mind oftentimes, or at least challenge me. Even if they agree to me, let's look at the other side of this. And should we have a broader conversation with the entire executive team? Should we have a broader conversation with the faculty, or with faculty and staff together in a town hall meeting? These are all questions that I think need to occur, and that's how we change culture. I'll also say MountMarty College has had 7 presidents in the last 17 years. So stability is really, really important too. And how that stability impacts that culture I've seen. I had a faculty member my first week on the job who came into my office and said, "We just want to be led." And so I think that's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge in that we can't get it wrong when we're really trying to build something special.
Can I just have one more point?
Sure.
I often, we're in North Dakota, and we compete against North Dakota State University, University of North Dakota for candidates. And we often can't compete financially for salary as high as the level. We get close, but I have found that the people that leave our institution, it's usually not money, it's the people they work with, or the environment they're in. And that's the burden I feel every day, is creating an environment where great people want to work. And that takes a lot of work.
It does.
But if you get the right people, it builds itself. And that's why I think it's very important when we hire for mission and the right people, that we put a lot of time and energy into that. Because you all know when you get the wrong people, they take all your energy. And it's important to get the right people on board. And the more time we spend in that, I think the better off we all are. It's hard, but
I think you're absolutely right. The reverse of that is also true. Given how we try to adhere to Benedictine tradition and values and the rule, when do you make that decision to sever a relationship with someone who is taking all that energy? And that's, especially in times of economic downturn, that stability is so important. And the rule says we need to hang in there with them unless there's no other option. But sometimes you have to make quick decisions. And that's one of the biggest things I struggle with, quite frankly, is I know this needs to occur, but I also need to understand the ramifications and the law of unintended consequences and how this will impact that person. Have I given them everything I possibly can to succeed, and is it just not going to work out? And that's tough, especially in this fast-changing, dynamic environment. Jane?
I promised Mark a hardball question.
Great.
And so I'll talk about a previous institution. So at my previous institution, because I've only had the pleasure of working for Mark for 1 year,
Yeah, it's the this is a tricky one because it's the academic environment, right? American higher education, and shared governance and the tradition that goes into that. That's quite frankly different on every campus. And so understanding the culture and the code on your campus is very important, no matter whether you're on the faculty or not. It's very important. But how do you merge that then with a Benedictine culture that we're striving for too? That's a challenge. And somebody earlier in another session was saying, you know, the weaponizing of the Benedictine tradition. And we probably all heard it. Well, that's not very Benedictine. And it's usually used to further our point, right? But how do you merge these two together? And I don't profess to know exactly how to do that. I think the best thing you can do is make the best decision. If you keep these ideas in mind and others from the rural, I think we can get there. But it's a challenge each and every day. Any other questions?
You referenced the town hall meeting with faculty and staff together. What sorts of conversations do you have?
Yeah, so we do that several times a year, usually once in the fall and once in the spring, especially with faculty. The one I'm talking about in September will be our new strategic planning process. So when I came on board, because we'd had several presidents, they had a strategic plan, but it was very operational in nature, not necessarily aspirational. And so I recognized early on that, yes, we need to take care of some of the operational challenges and issues there, but we also need to be aspirational. Where's the institution going? And so we formed a strategic planning advisory council meeting with faculty, staff, students, alumni, community leaders, and kind of talked about some ideas. The next step then is to go to an entire community meeting in the fall where we share these themes and ideas and get feedback. And then after that, I think moving to another conversation with the Strategic Planning Advisory Council. But every step in the way, making sure that we're bringing in the people who are going to be affected by this. Not all the students will come to this. I know they won't. I wouldn't have done it when I was 20 years old either. But I hope we can get a good chunk of the student leadership to be there. I think that's important. All right.
Well,
thank you so much.